To my left, we have Mafalda Duarte, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. Also to my left, we have the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mr. Ilan Goldfein. To my right, we have Nena Lili Nwabufo, the Vice President for the Regional Development Bank and Integration and Business Delivery at the African Development Bank. Also to my right, we have Sir Simon Steele, the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. We also have in this session with us representing one of the largest subnational development banks of Brazil, the Banco da Amazônia, which is located in the Amazon region of Brazil, a very old public development bank represented here by Mr. Irlando Gomes. We have our good friend and partner, Rodrigo Bettini, a senior advisor with the Milken Institute, coming all the way from Los Angeles, and also Fernando Teixeira from the Brazilian Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds, and also collaborating with other wealth funds all around, sovereign wealth funds all around the world. And finally, our good friend Luis Gabriel Azevedo, the Chief Strategy Officer of the Inter-American Development Bank Invest, the private arm of the IDB. And last but not least, we have the Executive Secretary of the Brazilian Association of Development Institutions, André Godoy. As you know, we have vertical funds, sovereign wealth funds, regional development banks, we have UNFCCC, we have many, many players that are active and partnering together to foster this agenda. I'm Brazilian. We have a big, big challenge this year of hosting in Belém, in the heart of Amazon, COP30, in a moment of many moving parts around the world, as we are all aware. In this session, we will have the chance to discuss and to understand what these players are doing and what these players especially are doing together. That's what Finance in Common is all about. I will start by giving the floor to Mafalda Duarte, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. Mafalda, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Sergio. I was not expecting this, but thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in this beautiful country and under this really critical topic. There's no way of around this, the fact that the science is telling us that we are really losing this. You know, we see it constantly in the media. We see the alerts from the scientists that, in fact, probably we should think of having to be climate neutral before 2050. All of the records that we are breaking. And then at the same time, there's also no way around the fact that we are living in an increasingly challenging geopolitical environment to respond to this challenge. I think one of the questions that I was asked to reflect on, and I don't envy Brazil this year as a host of COP30, given also this new geopolitical environment. What, in my view, in our view, is critical to think about in the lead up and for COP30. So let me break it down in a few points. One is that we really need to up our game in terms of our narrative. Because what we hear out there in terms of counter-narrative is really not doing, not serving as well. This attempt to portray that climate doesn't support economic development, doesn't support socioeconomic development. So this narrative that almost puts like climate and doing the right things for climate and green growth and economic development and security as two opposite forces, it's not serving us well. But I think we as a climate community have also not done enough in a way that actually probably that people can understand how tight these things are, how closely linked these things are, that it's misleading to think that they are not. And the evidence is there in terms of linkages of the climate change agenda with conflict, with migration, hampering socioeconomic development efforts. So I think one is one of narrative. What is our narrative this year? What is our narrative in the lead up to COP30? What is our narrative at COP30? The second, I think, and I understand that Brazil is very much focused on this, it's making this COP an accountability COP. We also have to be capable of saying, we have made all of these commitments over the years and we haven't fulfilled them. So how far behind are we in terms of commitments that we have made, that different groups and stakeholders have made at these COPs, which are not being fulfilled? And be accountable to it and be transparent about it. Show to the people that we understand that we have failed in some instances, that we have overpromised, we have underdelivered, and that we need to do better. So I think this needs to be, in my view, an accountability COP. It needs to be a COP that is not about, big new announcements and statements and commitments, but more an accountability COP and giving a sense of trust and confidence to all of those involved that we will focus deliberately on critical partnerships and implementation and results. Of course, and I would expect Simon to speak about this. This is a year of submitting more ambitious NDCs. Now, the question is, many countries out there looking at the new geopolitical environment are saying, really, what should our response be to this new geopolitical environment? So I think we need to support the countries, and again, I know that there are many invested in this, including Brazil, helping the countries come with credible, we can call it country platforms, we can call it different names, come up with credible plans of action, let's call it plans of action, that bring the relevant stakeholders together and that can already show, because I think that will also, if we work with the countries in tandem in terms of potential country platforms and NDCs, and they can show, yes, we are committing to more ambitious NDCs, and by the way, in tandem, here's a plan of action that is credible, that can deliver the first 5 years, that can deliver in the next few years, something ambitious and tangible. So I think that to me is important. I think we, in terms of the system, of the finance architecture system, that we all so much talk about, that is also doing a disservice in general to development and climate, I think that it is important, I mentioned it this morning in another event, that we move from just overly focusing on the multilateral development banks. They play a part, they are an important part, but what is that more integrated narrative of the other parts of the system? We know that the private investors are not doing as much as they could and they should. So that's, to me, another important point, which will hopefully help us, because one of the big expectations for this COP is how do we translate this NCQG, the new collective quantified goal? And Brazil has the very challenging task of coming up with a roadmap to deliver and to implement the NCQG. And again, it can only be reflecting on the whole system. And how do we make this system more responsive and come closer In the fix, as I've seen in background information of this conference, there are some interesting examples and narrative around mission-driven approaches of partnerships. So bringing PDBs and other financial institutions and somebody setting that mission. It's almost like, you know, when President Kennedy in the US said, okay, mission, going to the moon. And then multiple stakeholders came together, multiple industries, multiple sectors, and that was the challenge. So how do we recreate that for this critical challenge that we have in front of us, which is climate, which will undermine everything we are talking about here, economic development, security. It will undermine all of our efforts. So what is that mission challenge that we put out there and we rally all of the relevant stakeholders to help us collectively move towards? So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mafalda. These are very relevant questions. I would like to give the floor to the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, Ilan Goldfein, for his keynote speech. And just before that, I would also like to acknowledge the participation in this panel of Ibrahima Sheikh Diong, the Executive Director of the Loss and Damage Fund, another vertical fund recently created, so the new kid on the block. My apologies for not referencing you earlier. Mr. Goldfein, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sergio, and thank you all for being here, Mafalda, Sergio, and all the others. It's Ibrahim, the new kid on the block. Thank you very much, and Nema also. So for us, the road to COP30 is important. Not only has MDB with a stake on new mechanism for scaling up climate finance, but this time around the COP30 is also in the region. So it's double shift. In addition, when we think about the roadmap to 1.3 trillion, it is about private sector mobilization. It is about bringing the private sector. And here in the Financing Common is the great place for us to talk about it. So what I want to do is to tell you a little bit about how do we think framework of what are the issues that we believe we as an MDB would like to enhance going to the COP30. Number one, as I mentioned, very important, the financing, how to scale it up. How is that we're going to bring more resources, financing? It has to do beyond the resources that are coming from the multilaterals, from the development banks, from the PDBs, public development banks. And as Mafalda mentioned, it has to be a more complete. It has to bring more of the players. Thinking about the private sector, what we have is basically the need to the public sector enable the conditions for the private sector to invest what we need. So we will need to be able to provide the policies, the infrastructure, the capacity for the private sector to invest in more projects. That's number one. Number two, we can try to develop instruments, innovative instruments, to bring resources. And here, let me tell you a list of resources and instruments that we have been working lately to bring resources. Number one, we have been working with some specific instruments for the Amazon region. And remember, Belém is in the heart of the Amazon. With the World Bank and others, we are developing the Amazonia bonds, which are bonds that will bring resources to specific projects, verifiable projects, where we are going to monitor where the resources are coming, and the countries will be able to issue these Amazon bonds. And of course, we will try to issue our own Amazon bond just to give a benchmark for that. Then we have the Amazonia for All Fund, which is an ETF, which is a fund where we provide the projects that we have, that's the assets, and the liability is in the stock market, where each investor, even if it's a small investor, just for $20, can buy a piece of the Amazon. And that you democratize and you put everybody with a stake in the Amazon. Then we have all our debt swaps. We have done a debt for Amazon conversion in Ecuador, which was the last one. But we had that for Galapagos, and we have that for climate, and several others that we have been doing. Then the instrument on how do we mitigate things that the investor cannot control by itself. For example, exchange risk. So we have a project on EcoInvest that we have done with Brazil on trying to be able to use our capacity to go to the market, to be able to offer some of our pricing to the country and to the investors through us. That mitigates the risk, and maybe that will bring more investment. Up to now, it's a huge demand in Brazil, so can we scale it to the other countries? I think part of it we can do. It's a liquidity facility that everybody can have, and we can work about it. So those are the type of instruments that we can use. So number one, work for COP30 on private sector mobilization, enabling the conditions and offering instruments to have it work. That's number one. Number two, we need to work on the Amazon. We have the Amazonia Forever. It's a program. It's one of our flagship programs, where we include work on monitoring deforestation. We also include how we're going to have alternative activities, the bioeconomy. You cannot only monitor, you have to offer alternatives. You have to deal with the people, education, health. You have to deal with these cities. There are a lot of cities there. We need to find the infrastructure. And finally, we need to find sustainable agriculture and forestry. It's an holistic approach that brings a lot of the players together. We have MDBs, NGOs, the government. We have a mandate for the government. We have the Green Coalition, which are public banks. We have the Amazon coalition of private banks that IDB Invest have been doing. So we have a truly platform that we can work, and that's something that I think we can bring to the COP30. Number three, resilience. I think resilience is a common agenda that we all care. We are having natural disasters, even more. Thinking about how do we prepare countries, how we prepare economies, and how we react with a common framework is important, and I think we want to work it too. So when we have this type of pillars, I think it is important for us. Last but not least, it is clear that what we need is coordination across several players. And I think here, in this type of conference, and with this type of panel, is the ideal place for us to chat, to talk about how we can work together. I just show you how we, as an MDB of the region, of the COP30, is thinking about it. But of course, we cannot do it with just a small piece. So how can we together bring it so that we can have actually a road, not only from Baku to Belém, but from Belém to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We will now start the setting of a roundtable discussion. I would like to invite Simon Stiell, the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. Simon, you are in a very challenging position, not challenged, but challenging. You do have a member country that becomes a member, then gets out, then comes back, then gets out. We've been discussing, everybody, this is on the headlines, no secret for anybody. 2 of the funds here were also created under the big umbrella of the UNFCCC, 2 of the vertical funds, the Green Climate Funds and the fund and the Loss and Damage Fund. So not only you have this direct view and interaction in the negotiation part, in the scientific component, but also in terms of the tools to respond to climate change. So in terms of your broad view for an outlook for 2025 and the road from Baku to Belém, which is the big 2 here, how do you see these collaborations unfolding and especially giving all the resources we have in this room and around the table? What's your outlook for this road from Baku to Belém?
Thank you very much, Sergio. And I can actually steal from some of the earlier presentations from Ilan and Mafalda. I think it was Ilan who, and answering your final point in terms of who is in this room, it is about collaboration. And with all of the challenges that we're facing, how we will navigate that is through each of us continuing to step forward and stepping forward together. And having my brother on my right and sister on my left with the Green Climate Fund and Loss and Damage Fund, I mean, these are very, very practical examples of how the process, as unwieldy as it is, as slow as we move, these 2 very, very valuable institutions are born out of that difficult process. So, you know, I am still highly optimistic in terms of what can be achieved in the long run despite short-term challenges. So it's clearly, you know, this is not business as usual. In reality, it never has been, but you know, things are getting more difficult, and it's important that, you know, we acknowledge the geopolitics, those headwinds we are battling against, the pressure on the multilateral process, multilateralism, and again, that's why, you know, that collaboration at all levels is so important. And as one steps away, others will and are stepping in. We know this, what the science is telling us. We're seeing accelerated impacts, and we are seeing development budgets being slashed. So that's the negative. But if we look at, that's the glass half empty. If we look at the glass half full, we just have to look at last year and the $2 trillion of investment in the transition, and that compared to $1 trillion in fossil fuel investments. So we are seeing a shift in the tide. Where we are now is very different to where we were 10 years ago. And when we were looking at the first US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, and we look at where we are now, it is a different world, still with its challenges, but there has been significant development, significant progress in the transition, which with efforts may slow it, but it's unstoppable. And I think it's important for us to focus on that. And again, if we look at you know, Paris plus 10, you know, before the Paris Agreement, we were on track for a 5 degree Celsius world. We will see what the next round of NDCs delivers, but we're certainly in a better position with still a long way to go. And picking up on Mafalda's comments on the narrative, I mean, it is clear, and if we've seen some of the political shifts that we've seen throughout the course of last year and continuing to see this year. We just had the results of the German elections. Clearly, our messages, whether it's on science, whether it's on the negative impacts of climate change, that certainly isn't cutting through with the electorate. So there is a need for us to recalibrate, and that recalibration needs to be around the progress that is being made, but most importantly, the impact that the work that we do, the actions that are being taken benefit people, and to speak in a language that connects with real lives. So it is, and there is an opportunity with COP30 for that reframing. And the Brazilians bring a unique perspective, not just based on the location of this year's COP, but also central tenets that their leadership within the multilateral process has always been, and that is that focus on people, on nature, and on the economy, and how that can all link through. And it is moving away from just speaking about pledges, but speaking about implementation, speaking about delivery, and speaking about impact. So, looking back, before I look forward to what we will be seeing this year, but looking backwards at how we ended last year in Baku, and the significance of reaching an agreement on the new finance goal, as insufficient as it is, and many developing countries expressed their frustrations, but a tripling of finance to developing countries to 300 billion per year is not as insignificant as it is, has significance. But bearing in mind that that is just the beginning, that is the baseline, not the end line. Where we need to go is that pivot from the 300 billion, being able to demonstrate how that can be credibly delivered, taking lessons learned from the previous goal of 100 billion, but then how that then transforms into the 1.3 trillion and the development of that roadmap. And that roadmap has to be credible, has to be based on concrete actions. Developing countries will not be hoodwinked into fantasy or theory. It has to be on concrete delivery. And that will be a core element of the COP30 package. And ensuring that climate finance flows, and it flows from all actors, from all sources to developing countries. And the delivery of that roadmap, Ilan alluded to what actions need to be taken, both in terms of mobilizing public finance, as limited as it is, but ensuring that those public funds can be leveraged, but can also be used to how do we create that those enabling conditions to crowd in private investment and other innovative sources of finance that Ilan spoke to. So it is about grant-based finance, and it is about ensuring that those investments are translated into impacts on people, and that is done without mortgaging their future. So issues such as debt and debt sustainability has to be a core part of the conversation moving forward. The quality of that finance, concessionality, access, availability, affordability, all of these issues have to be addressed in moving forward. and that ongoing reform process of the multilateral development banks. That has to accelerate and demonstrate how that is going to deliver the scaling up of finance that is required. And that is finance not just for mitigation, but also for resilience and for adaptation. It must translate. There are business cases on the mitigation side. There are attractive formats for private investment. For resilience building, for adaptation, that has to be viewed through other lenses. So the scaling up of adaptation finance, critical, and my friend on my right, support for loss and damage, absolutely critical there. And then how that translates into the implementation of the big deliverables this year, which are the next round of NDCs and national adaptation plans. We keep forgetting about national adaptation plans. Both are to be delivered, and both need to speak to being investable, bankable, and implementable, and how these plans can evolve from the previous 2 generations of climate plans so that they speak to implementation on the ground. So this is a big year within the climate sphere. And what will be at the heart of Brazil's offering as we speak of Paris +10, and we reflect on progress made over the last 10 years, and there has been progress, as well as the gaps that need to be filled, but it will also be Belém +10, what the next 10 years to 2035, which will be the time period for this current round of NDCs, what that looks like, and how in very practical terms we can deliver on closing that ambition and implementation gap. But I come back to my opening comment. It requires the collaboration of all of us within this room and other rooms that we will see ourselves in between now and the time we get to Belém. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for providing us with this very relevant vision of the challenges, of the opportunities, of the tools, of all the partners that need to be involved in terms of different stakeholders. You just gave me many ideas for questions that I will throw back to the participants in this roundtable and the next one. Now, I would like to ask Madam Nena Lili Nwabufo, Vice President of the African Development Bank. You have several portfolios under your responsibility. Many of the areas that are under your umbrella touch some of the issues that Simon has just mentioned, including, the enabling conditions. I would like to give you the floor already asking you about what are the key priorities of the African Development Bank and specifically under your portfolio to tackle some of these issues and what type of challenges you are facing in your portfolio in Africa.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Sergio. On behalf of the AFDB, I'm pleased to join you today at this pivotal gathering as we work collectively to scale up sustainable finance as we lead up to COP30. It's not breaking news that Africa is at a critical juncture. We are facing a climate crisis that threatens not only our economies, but also our very existence. When farmers in the Sahel watch their crops wither under relentless drought, or a mother in Mozambique is rebuilding her house for the third time after severe flooding, these are not statistics. They are the human face of Africa's climate crisis today. And their struggles remind us why we are here today, to ensure and reaffirm our commitment that climate finance must not be a bottleneck, but a catalyst for Africa's sustainable future. Now, I'd like to speak briefly on 3 important points that relate to the work we do, the African context, and the work we do at the African Development Bank. And the 3 areas are Africa's climate finance imperative. The second one is innovative financial mechanisms for climate resilience. And the third is the global partnerships and learning experiences. Now, on Africa's climate finance imperative, some African nations are dedicating up to 10% of their national budgets to address climate-related disasters. But despite these significant expenditures, climate change continues to exact a heavy toll whereby Africa loses an estimated 5 to 15% of its GDP annually due to climate-induced disruptions. And these figures, of course, are staggering, underscoring the immense strain climate change places on already constrained economies today. And in the face of this existential threat, Africa's climate finance needs remain critically unfunded. The continent, despite being highly vulnerable, we receive only 3.6% of the global climate finance and the billions and the trillions we talk about. And this is far below what is required. We need approximately $2.7 trillion by the year 2030 to meet our climate goals in Africa. But the current funding is covering just about 23% of the estimated needs. So this funding gap is more than a statistic. It threatens the future of Africa's development. It is an empirical challenge that must be urgently addressed as a moral and economic imperative. Also, we have passed the time of having pilots to deliver incremental progress, because without an immediate action to bridge this gap, Africa's development gains will be undermined, and our economies will continue to suffer irreversible damage. In 2023, the AFDB allocated a record $5.8 billion to climate finance, representing 55% of our total new approvals, and this surpassed our target of 40% for the 3rd consecutive year. And out of this amount, 58% was dedicated to adaptation, ensuring that African nations can implement climate-resilient policies and programs. But our work does not stop here. We are pushing the boundaries to create sustainable, scalable, and catalytic solutions for Africa's green transition. And we remain committed to closing the funding gap by continuing to mobilize, continuing to innovate, and scale up climate finance. Now, on innovative financial mechanisms for climate finance, at the bank, we are working to increase the share of global climate finance flowing to Africa from 3% to 10% by 2030. And we're doing this by developing financial mechanisms that attract investments into Africa's green economy and deliver transformative results. Let me just highlight a few of these. The first one is the Desert to Power Initiative. This is a $20 billion project that is set to bring 10 gigawatts of solar energy to 11 Sahelian countries, providing clean electricity to 250 million people while reducing Africa's dependence on fossil fuels. The second one is the Climate Action Window, which we have established, and is an innovative facility that seeks to raise $14 billion to provide easy access to climate finance for Africa's 37 low-income countries. And through this initiative, the bank has developed what could be unarguably the largest adaptation portfolio on the continent. Also at the AFDB, we are spearheading efforts to unlock up to $50 billion annually in untapped climate finance potential for African nations through carbon credit mechanisms, enabling African countries to access critical climate finance for adaptation and mitigation. But despite this, the progress we have achieved, significant challenges persist, and the journey to prosperity needs to continue with greater urgency, dedication, and momentum. Thirdly, on global partnerships and learning, The bank has established partnerships to deliver Africa's climate ambition. And one example is the partnership with the Global Center on Adaptation on the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, which is aimed to mobilize $25 billion to scale up climate resilience across Africa. Already, the program has impacted about 9.4 million people by enhancing food security and empowering youth-led climate solutions through climate-smart agriculture, resilient infrastructure, and youth-led green innovation. We're also working with partners to develop an African climate finance taxonomy to ensure that investments are genuinely sustainable and impactful. Furthermore, we are embracing blended finance to attract institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, and impact investors as well. Now, as we mobilize for COP30, this will be a defining moment for Africa and the world, and we cannot afford another cycle of pledges without much action. We have to demonstrate that finance will not remain a barrier to Africa's sustainable future, but it will be a catalyst for shared prosperity for everyone. It's not just about securing financing for Africa's climate goals. It is about demonstrating that investing in Africa's climate resilience is smart economics, benefiting both Africa and the global economy. At the bank, we are working to ensure that COP30 delivers concrete financing solutions for Africa. In closing, let me reiterate that the urgency of this moment cannot be overstated for us in Africa. Climate finance is not a luxury. It is an existential necessity for us. Africa is not seeking aid. We are seeking partnerships. We are seeking investments and opportunities to drive long-term climate-smart prosperity for our citizens. We are ready at the African Development Bank to lead. We are ready to partner. We are ready to innovate. We are ready to collaborate to unlock the financing mechanisms that will drive a just transition and secure a sustainable future for Africa and the world. So as we prepare for COP30, we are looking forward to collaborate with all development partners, and we jointly call on everybody to commit to action that will close the climate finance gap and build a resilient, sustainable, and prosperous Africa for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam. Now I would like to give the floor to Ibrahima Sheikh Diong. He's the Executive Director at the Loss and Damage Fund, the fund for responding to loss and damage. Ibrahima, all of us have been following along the past decades all the challenges that small island countries, developing countries, and even advanced countries have been facing in terms of effects of climate change, extreme events. All of us were watching closely the fires in Los Angeles just a few weeks back, or the floods in Germany, or the floods in Brazil, and pretty much everywhere else in the world. We are closely hearing the reports on all kinds of tools that are being deployed or in terms of emergency or the overarching challenge and its many aspects that have been presented by other members of this roundtable. You took office less than a year ago as Executive Director. You've been working in this field for many years, of course. We are all eager to hear from you what the strategy is. How do you see this challenge? What kind of partnerships you want to develop and to tackle the mandate that you have received? Please take the floor. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, Sergio, as you indicated, a new kid on the block, but an old new kid on the block. I am mindful we are standing between you and the beautiful weather of Cape Town. Let me keep it short by making 3 points. One, just to reflect on the journey of the fund and what we learned from that, particularly when it comes to collaboration and complementarity. And then second, work you through a sense of urgency for the fund to be actively relevant to the most vulnerable countries you just mentioned earlier. And last, say a few words about where I see opportunities for collaboration with the banks, but also with other funds as well. I think on the journey, I could not think of a better time to have this conversation. 10 years after Paris, a few months away from Brazil, the expectation, particularly for the most vulnerable countries, is quite high, and we can't fail them. And that's why it's really important to have this kind of conversation, so we all appreciate a sense of urgency before we actually go to Brazil. So I've been 3 months on the job and reflecting how we got to where we are and having the fund. In COP27 in Egypt, when the funds were being discussed, I think a lot of people were expecting that we're going to actually walk away from Sharm el-Sheikh and not actually getting a consensus of having this fund after decades of talking about it. But the mere fact that it was an agenda and accepted in principle and set up a transitional committee to work on the design, I think made many of us, and the gentleman to my left in particular, extremely hopeful what we can achieve. Second milestone of the journey in Dubai, the COP28, where the decision was made to actually operationalize the fund. Many, including myself, were actually doubtful that we can actually operationalize the fund as quickly as we had anticipated at COP28. Well, look what we've done. In less than a year, we have a board, the pledges. We have a host country, Philippines. We have a host of the Secretary of the World Bank, and you have an executive director in less than a year. So imagine for a second, if we keep the global solidarity in everything we do in climate finance, how much we can achieve. We got to COP29, and then renewing the commitment to the fund, keeping the momentum and advocacy, and making most of us very hopeful and hopeful that if you actually keep the momentum and global solidarity, we can move mountains. So now, as we head to COP30, obviously the expectation is delivery. It's no longer about governance progress. It's how the fund can actually deliver for the most vulnerable so we can begin to see the relevancy in the countries that are affected by climate change. Second point I wanted to make is a sense of urgency. While we're doing all of that, extreme weather conditions are not getting better, they're getting worse. We see lots of economic losses, but also non-economic losses, particularly what I call the human faces of climate change, and that is the people affected by the tropical cyclone, by drought, by flood, by people who actually lost their income, their assets, their living condition, and so on and so forth, to the extent that it's really important that we began to show this fund was not just set up because of the governance success, but also set up for those who actually expect so much from us. And that is why when I came on board, our board has a couple of priorities. Number one, the board has made a commitment out of the money that's been already pledged as quickly as possible for those pledges to be actually converted into actual funding so we can begin to make commitment. Number two, our board is actually committed to basically get into early interventions. And that is how the fund can provide support for rapid response to the extreme weather conditions, how the fund can work with communities to provide support, what is small grant or other funding that we can provide, so we can begin to actually show relevancy to the communities that expect so much from us. Number four, and extremely important, the fund, and I think Simon will certainly support this, we have to expedite the capitalization of the fund to get into the billions. Our demand is not $741 million that we'll get today, which you appreciate, but it's really important that we expedite the capitalization of the fund to get to the billions to meet the demand. Now, the reality is the world has changed in the meantime with what you know in the global landscape. What people don't actually understand about the fund, it's not only one country. We've got about 27 countries that pledge to the fund. So I get always asked this question, was one leaving the fund, or living the climate debate, what does that mean for your fund? The global solidarity is here, so I think our focus is making sure we keep that momentum in the global solidarity so that actually the fund become part of the solution, not part of the problem. So we have to expedite our resource mobilization, not the traditional resource mobilization because funds are running out, unfortunately, but maybe begin to innovate. Maybe the tough question about levies, this is the time to put it on the table so we can have a flow of funding coming to the fund so we can actually make commitment to the countries that expect so much. Let me wrap up by saying where I do see opportunities for complementarity, for coordinations with other funds, but also other banks. So one of the things that we are doing at the fund is extremely important, and that is to help countries to put together the national strategy for responding to loss and damage. It is absolutely critical as the fund, what we provide is actually sustainable. It's not just a one-off support, but we're mindful there are other funds, other institutions that are providing support. It's really important as a fund, we join forces with other institutions in this room in helping the most vulnerable to come up with a much more sustainable way to respond to loss and damage. Second, and this is extremely critical, we're learning from other funds. One of the biggest frustrations I hear from others about the fund, there is no point of raising billions of dollars that are not accessible to people who need them. So what I call the AAA of climate finance, affordability, accessibility, and availability of funding is extremely critical for those who need them. And that's why we need to look at our accreditation process, keep it nimble, simple, accessible to those who need the funds, so we can actually focus to get funding to where it's needed so we can be impactful. Last but not least, there is tremendous opportunity for co-financing. Our fund alone, no matter how many billions that we got, we can't do it alone. So there are opportunities, whether it's grant, baggage support, pre-rent financing, concessional loans, you name it. There are opportunities for the institution around the table to work with our fund, with the GCF of the world, to make sure that we can provide the support together and avoid duplications as we engage with countries. And all of this has to be owned by the countries so that it's a bottom-up approach, but not the fund that comes in provided the capital, but there's no ownership in the country. So I look forward to working with the other funds in April in Washington. We are convening a high-level dialogue entirely focused on complementarity and coordination of the funds, and I look forward to having the gentleman to my left providing the strong message about we have to work together. So thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahima. Thank you so much. I would like to invite Rodrigo Bettini, the senior advisor at the Milken Institute, to provide his views and the role that the Milken Institute has to play in this topic. As many of you know, Davos is where private sector goes to meet the world leaders. Milken is where the world leaders go meet the private sector. It's a very, very large conference, a global conference taking place every year in Los Angeles, and also regional meetings in Abu Dhabi, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Europe, and many other places. Rodrigo, please tell us a little bit about the role you see for Milken and the private sector in this discussion.
Thank you, Sergio. The Milken Institute is a global economic think tank that seeks to provide capital solutions for some of the world's most pressing issues. Within the Milken Institute's ecosystem exists a group of approximately 400 capital allocators that represent $34 trillion. Now, when we speak to this investor base, specifically about Latin America, about Brazil, on the road to COP30, myself and my team, as leaders of the Latin American region, we always hear the same three concerns: political and regulatory uncertainty, macroeconomic volatility in the way of high inflation, interest rates, FX risk, and deforestation and ESG concerns. And so we have to find a way to go beyond the rhetoric and beyond the headlines, and we've made it our personal mission within the Institute to message to our investor stakeholder base the tremendous opportunity that exists in Brazil and other developing nations. When you zoom out, these are all very pressing issues, of course: uncertainty, volatility. These capital allocators also subject to investment policy and performance constraints. But these are all relatively short-term issues. When you look at the long-term sustainability of the human species on this planet, and you look at a country like Brazil, that has the largest tropical rainforest in the world, has the most fresh water in the world with approximately 12% of the Earth's water resources. It is the breadbasket of the world, largest producer of coffee, beef, a global supplier of soybeans, etc. This is a tremendous opportunity, and to not look at Brazil in a long-term view, in our opinion, is a lost opportunity. So what has been the biggest issue, in our opinion, is a lack of messaging, inefficient marketing on the part of the region to expose the world's investor community to all of these opportunities that exist beyond these shorter-term challenges. So Brazil's opportunity in COP30 is to present itself and message to the world that they are a world leader in the green bioeconomy, a top producer of sustainable biofuels. There is a massive natural capital and carbon credit potential that is virtually untapped, with companies like TIG and Mombach already engaged in massive reforestation efforts. There is a very strong demographic and consumption growth, a very young population that is extremely technologically savvy. It presents an opportunity for diversification and high returns, and now there are government incentives for sustainable investments across the board to help facilitate. So, in the road to COP30, during the conference, how do we get there? I think we have to change the message and change the narrative, as Mafalda stated earlier. It cannot be burning. It has to be a story of opportunity. We have to increase investor protection in these developing regions. The Brazilian government has created the BIP, which is the Platform for Climate Investment and Ecological Transition, which is a framework for risk mitigation in hopes of attracting greater foreign investment. We have to strengthen political and regulatory stability, streamline legal and bureaucratic processes for business, enhance ESG commitments, and as my colleagues here have said, most importantly, create a framework to enforce accountability. If we're able to achieve this, I think we will see a much greater inflow of capital to Brazil and other developing nations, and I think this will help achieve the 1.3 billion goal and beyond. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rod. As you were talking about Brazil, I think many of us thought that you could be talking about South Africa, about Nigeria, India, really any developing country where we see that trend. I wouldn't even say we could talk about all of Africa, I would say, in terms of the demographics of young population, many of them savvy. We can see many countries here there where African Development Bank has a portfolio, or some of the vertical funds where we see technology enabling the leapfrogging of many sectors, banking one of them. We know all the some of the examples, some of the positive examples. This is very interesting to see kind of the glass half full, as our colleague has indicated just earlier on this session. I would like to go back to Simon Steele and just ask him, another question in terms of, emergency. Simon, do you think that we will still need to be seeing more frequent extreme events before our leaders can move forward, and other actors, in terms of mobilizing more resources? Or do you think that little by little, in the negotiating tables, in the agreements, in the successful partnerships that we've been building, we will be able to achieve not only the goals, but the mobilization that it's necessary for us to transform our industry, our agriculture, and just the way we manage resources all around the world?
There are a couple of ways I can answer that. The science is absolutely clear. You have virtually the entire scientific community spelling out what is happening, and with every single report, the only thing that shifts is the acceleration of the impacts, and then we are seeing those, every single week we're seeing a new impact. The shift is, and I've been in this sphere for many years, where those impacts were in far-flung places, small islands like mine, other vulnerable communities within the developing world. And that moral imperative that those representatives from those vulnerable countries and the platforms they've been given over the last 10 years has been exhausted. Those messages of death, destruction, livelihoods, lives wiped out, that hasn't cut through. What we have seen is a shift now to developed countries, developed economies. Look at what we saw in California just a few weeks ago. And we see the dramatics, how dramatic that is. And talk of homes, in very wealthy areas, becoming uninsurable, and question marks as to whether even in the richest country, with some of the richest people in the world, that they cannot afford to build back, let alone building back better. So, but is that cutting through? And I would question whether that's the case. We saw Spain, we've seen Germany, we've seen, so this is touching every strata of life in every single region. But I question, you see the decisions that are being made, as we speak, of aid and support being cut, question marks over the irrefutable science and fundamental principles of human responsibility, human dignity, etc. So I come back to the point that Mafalda made, I underscored that too. I think we have a responsibility, those of us around this table and in our circles, the narrative has to change. So is it loss of life, loss of livelihoods? It's about, I think that the three areas that we need to concentrate on. One is about people, and it's not, and there are, so people and the economy. Those are the two areas. And the two messages are how climate action is good for business, good for the economy, job creation, opportunity creation, what this means in people's pockets, and that this makes sense, how this impacts whether it's our health, whether it is other social benefits, but that has to be spelt out, and those are the positives. The other side to it is the cost of inaction, and I think we need to start adding up these numbers more, better, and in a clearer form, where it's absolutely clear that so the benefits of doing and the costs of not doing, and it in a way that is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than methods that are used in populist political kind of arenas. So I think some of that reframing, and I think we have an opportunity to start doing that this year in Belém.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Your words do bring a lot of reflection, I think, for all of us who are involved in the field of development and climate finance. I would like to go back to Ibrahima. Ibrahima, just a question. You know, we all know Loss and Damage Fund. You took your responsibility just some months back, but let's make a little exercise here and like kind of 5 years ahead. In terms of a little bit more granularity, what do you think you will have in your portfolio, right? If we were in 2030, which is a landmark for many of the international agreements and the goals we have already set, how do you see the Loss and Damage Fund and the portfolio in 5 years?
I think I see a couple of things. Number one, it is important that the fund continues to be relevant to the most vulnerable countries we're trying to protect. I was telling my team the other day the worst that could happen to this fund, the disasters in the Caribbean and Africa, and everybody asks the question, where is the fund? So I think priority number one, we have to make sure that the fund is actually relevant to the crisis we're trying to address, to the extent at least we show it's not just about the progress we made on governance, but it's also relevant to the countries we're trying to support. I think second, I'd like to see a fund that's highly capitalized. I mentioned earlier, we're very grateful we got $741 million, but what we need is in the billions. And I think expediting our fundraising to the extent that our energy and our time is actually focused on implementation, not raising money. Raising money can be a little bit tiring sometimes. But nevertheless, somebody has to do it. But I think eventually, I want us to get to a sustainable way of raising capital so we can begin to focus more on implementation and less in actually raising money. I think third, equally important, and I mentioned this, we're not alone in this. There are other funds, there are other players around this table. The spirit of complementarity and coordination doesn't have to be just word. It has to get to the point whereby when we engage with countries, we can actually join forces, A, to avoid duplication, and then second, join our resources to prepare the countries, and eventually co-finance some of these opportunities, and I think that's the best way to help these countries. And last but not least, we got to start telling stories. And I think the gentleman to my left, I saw him a few weeks ago in Bonn. Simon was our biggest advocate. He said to me, Ibrahima, we need to make sure this fund begin to tell some impact stories so we can unveil and showcase the human face of climate change, and that's when we say the fund is successful. As much I'm very, impressed by what we've done and the governance and everything else, but ultimately, if you think about that person in the Caribbean, in Africa, what do we have to tell them? A story of impact, and that's why I want to see the fund be 4 or 5 years from now, so I can leave my legacy behind and go and retire.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was talking about leapfrogging, so we will do a little leapfrogging here and also take into consideration that we are all here. And I've been in multilateral development banking, in national development banking. I've been the president of the Association of Development Banks of Brazil and Latin America, and I've also been president of 2 subnational development banks. I'm very passionate about the last mile. So we're talking about the road to Belém, and we have here Irlando Gomes. He actually lives and works in Belém because he is the treasurer of the Banco da Amazônia. So he will be our host. We will certainly see him again because the bank is headquartered in Belém. It's the capital of the state of Pará, a beautiful city that I think most of us will have the opportunity to visit, those who do not know it yet. Very charming city. And this institution is one of the oldest public development banks in Brazil. Its funding is guaranteed in the Brazilian Constitution. So it's a constitutional fund that provides most of the funding. But still, it's an institution that partners with many other development banks, and I'm sure they will be a great host to many of these discussions in their headquarters in Belém. Please, Irlando, I would like you to explore some of the challenges, the concrete challenges you are facing at the last mile in terms of the projects you finance. And make no mistake, this is a very big bank he helps run. This is, billions of dollars every year in capital deployment. The floor is yours, Irlando.
Thank you, Sergio. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here today in this lovely city. And it's on purpose I am speaking now because I've learned with all of the former speakers. Well, we face in the final mile 2 main challenges. The first one is the cost of capital. And let me tell you why, ladies and gentlemen. Our main fund is from constitutional funds. We have a subsidized interest rate, so we have a very, very low interest rate. So we are designing products that combine blended finance, actually, between our own fund and the international fund. So we can at least put 80% of our funds and 20% of international funds. So we can mix it to take a very competitive interest rate to apply its funds. So this is the first solution we find to the main challenge we face. And the second one is the management of liability. We are a bank, so we handle asset and liability. And to make this opportunity to be a win-win partnership, we should find a way to make the rest of the operation profitable, because our operation lasts at least 25 years, and our credit line is 14 years. But in the speech of Mr. Ila, I could see a solution for this problem we're facing in the final mile. And as Mr. Ibrahim already spoken, we should talk about people. We should talk about the condition of these people that live in the forest, in the area that needs the finance the most. So we are working hard to put in place our aspiration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to shift gears again and invite Fernando Teixeira. He is representing the Brazilian Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds, but also representing the World Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds. So there is a very rich network of sovereign wealth funds around the world. Some of them are here present. Fernando is representing them, and I want him to give the outlook of what role the sovereign wealth funds can play in these topics we've been discussing. Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergio. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss two specific topics. The first one regarding the panel, I mean, how to include sovereign wealth fund as part of the discussions of COPs and, of course, of COP30. And the other one is to discuss a little bit on how the subnational sovereign wealth funds of Brazil can be part of the sustainable finance ecosystem and, of course, catalyze global investors, including those sovereign wealth funds that, I mean, has lots of interest of making investments in Brazil and Latin America, but needs, of course, good projects and long-term partners. So we believe that subnational funds can be this kind of partners. On the first topic, I mean, last year in Baku was the first time that there was an official session on sovereign wealth funds. And I mean, the government of Azerbaijan did it, and we believe that it should be part of COP30 as well, and we are working with the Brazilian government to have the opportunity to bring those, I mean, really global funds that together demonstrate around 80 and $10 trillion to the table. And we also visualize that even in those global events like FIX, there is a lack of mention about sovereign wealth funds and also a lack of participation of those funds. And we believe that there is a huge opportunity because in the space of the International Forum that we are a member, I mean, there are these discussions on how to make part of sustainable finance ecosystem and so on and so far, really being bigger and bigger. And so, I mean, there is maybe just a measure of like putting together those people on the table because at the end, I mean, development bank, public banks, and sovereign wealth funds are all like state-owned funds and enterprise and so on, and could really, I mean, be helpful to coordinate investments. On the second part, talking about the subnational funds, I mean, Brazil has now 8 subnational funds from royalties from oil and gas and iron ore. There are other initiatives going on also regarding critical minerals. And we believe that those funds, that they are states and municipal ones, they have the great condition to understand the challenges of the territories. And of course, I mean, dialoguing with the public financial system, I mean, designing good projects and being, I mean, a part of those ecosystem. And we are dialoguing with ABDE, with BNDES, and of course with the Minister of Finance of Brazil and the Minister of Environment to be able to better understand the role of those funds. We in Brazil, I mean, the Brazilian government is, since last year, designing different public policies and instruments to attract private capital and also institutional investors. Of course, the climate plan, the ecological transformation plan, and other planning being developed, but also instruments that can de-risk for those institutional investors. We can, I mean, the country platform was already mentioned, but we can talk about the Eco-Invest, we can talk about the sustainable taxonomy, and we really think that there is an opportunity to make those investments happen, and our subnational funds being a kind of anchor. Of course, if you think about financial engineering, I mean, they could be part of, I mean, doing the risking, guarantees, blended finance, but especially co-investment and making part of hybrid financial instruments. Let me just give you an example on the relations between the development banks and sovereign wealth funds, what's happening in Brazil right now. The state of Espírito Santo has a state-level development bank called Bandes, and the Bandes is one of the managers of the sovereign wealth fund of Espírito Santo. And the Bandes is developing a special fund to attract investors to the state regarding the ESG agenda right now, in this moment, together with BNDES. This is an example that how we can find solutions in between funds and development banks. But to be able to really, put all those subnational funds in the discussions and bigger discussions regarding attracting capital, in Brazil we need a specific regulation. Now these funds, are not properly regulated, and the public manager has, some difficulty to make some kinds of investments. And we are discussing this regulation with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Planning, and the Central Bank of Brazil right now. And we would like really that we could, in the short term, having this specific regulation working to allow those funds to make important investments. And to finally, just a brief mention, we are organizing as the Forum of Brazilian Sovereign Wealth Funds a roadmap to COP30, together with the International Forum and with some partners in Brazil and abroad, including ABDE. And in June, in the 3rd and 4th of June, we are hold a seminar in Brasilia, in Brazil, to talk about those opportunities. We will bring some global funds, we'll bring some development banks, and of course, I'm inviting all of you to be there and to be able to make these discussions, getting even stronger in this roadmap to COP30. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fernando. I would like to continue the discussion and invite our good friend André Godoy. He's the Executive Secretary of the Brazilian Association of Development Banks and Development Institutions, which gathers 34 DFIs and other institutions that are financing projects all around Brazil. I would also like to remind you that this session is also co-sponsored by ALIDI, the Latin American Association of Development Finance Institutions, and the Brazilian Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds. André, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening. First, I think it's important to give a Brazilian overview because the reality is similar to other middle-income and low-income countries. So the challenge and the strengths are different when you compare to developed countries. First, when you talk about climate, can you imagine that in Brazil we have 87% of our energy matrix come from renewable source. So, but on the other side, most part of carbon emissions come from deforestations, come from the land use, change of land use, and of course, soil degradation. So we have different challenges, and social aspects are very important for us. So we understand that climate and social aspects are inseparable. We cannot solve climate problems without take care of social problems. So increase the incomes is very important for us, and the measures that the development banks must take must pay attention in these factors too. So I would like to emphasize what is happening in Brazil right now and what the development banks are doing, and what in COP30 it's a great opportunity to show what is happening. As Mafalda said, accountability, to show what is happening, what has already been achieved and what is not, and the challenge. First, the development banks in Brazil, as in other parts of the world, are one of the most important source of money for sustainability as a whole. In Brazil, the development banks are responsible for 46% of the credit market. But when we are comparing with the financing of municipalities, we are talking about 96%. And adaptation happens in the cities. And so we are talking that those institutions are one of the main responsible for the investments and to bring private sector and to bring private money to these objectives. In the last 4 years, those banks invested $400 billion in the SDGs, in the Sustainable Development Goals. It has been increasing in the last years. So it's a very important data that probably we are going to show in November in COP30 in Belém. Recent case, the first one's funding. Funding is important. In Brazil, in the last 3 years, Brazil has issued $17.3 billion in green, social, and sustainability bonds. That's an important movement to bring international money to Brazil, and it's an example to be, in my opinion, to be followed to other countries. And one of the main recent measures that the president of IDB said in his presentation is to mitigate the costs of to bring this money from international institutions. And how to do it? How to do it? Exchange rate risks. That's an important role that development banks and governments should do to mitigate these costs and make the money that comes from international institutions cheaper for the purpose that they should be. The second one, curb the effects of deforestation. We have a huge project in Brazil that is being developed in the state of Pará that's going to host in Brazil the COP30. That's a huge project of restore forests. Imagine in Brazil we have as I said, one of the most important source of carbon emissions are deforestation. So this project is made to restore a big part of the forest, and then we can curb these emissions. And a development bank, a national one, BNDES, is involved in implementing this project. And third, what is very important is adaptation of our cities. In this case specifically, we are facing, and other countries are facing too, of course, the limit of budgets, especially because we are talking about cities, we're talking about public budget, and how to face it, how to provide guarantees, how to provide mechanisms that promote more investment, specifically the private investments in cities. That's a simple sentence that I would like to say, like, people must see sustainability as an opportunity to make money instead of opportunity to spend more money. That's it. I think that's the message, and that's the role of the development banks. Thank you.
Thank you, André. Last but not least, I would like to invite Luis Gabriel Toda Azevedo. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at the Inter-American Development Bank private arm, IDB Invest. Gabriel has been involved in the field of sustainable development, climate finance for many decades at the World Bank, at IDB, in the private sector, working with governments and in projects all around the world. Gabriel, I would like to get your insights and kind of, you know, you will do the wrapping of this session, so you have a big responsibility in kind of guiding us through and a little bit summarizing it, but also providing your insights from your position in the strategy as a Chief Strategy Officer at the IDB on all of these topics. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sergio, and I'll try to be brief. And when the organizers invited me, they suggest we try to focus on challenges and opportunities, which for me are two sides of the same coin. So I want to illustrate that with an example of me being last. No, I find myself between all of you and dinner, which is a challenge. But the opportunity is, after I heard so many good things, I can just speak for 30 seconds and sound smart. So this is an illustration of the two sides. But now, being serious and trying to wrap up, because I actually heard a lot of things that resonated with our own thinking, and I'll try to summarize it in truly 1 or 2 minutes. First, going back to this idea of challenge and opportunities and Mafalda's introduction. And before I do that, I just want to give you 2 data points, which are important. And with a disclaimer, I am an optimistic, but the data points that I'll give to you may not sound like it. Brazil started to monitor and disseminate deforestation of the Amazon in 1990, 35 years ago. And the first COP, COP1, was in Berlin in 1995. I wasn't in Berlin, I was in 97 in Kyoto. So almost 30 plus years also. And I give you those data points going back to many of the points that were made here by Mafalda and by others, also by Simon, is that we need to recognize that we have under-delivered. That's a reality, right? That's a reality. We have under-delivered. Now, progress has been made. Many here have talked about progress, and that's important, and I think we should celebrate that progress. However, we need to be conscious and transparent with ourselves within this community that, those 2 data points, we had the hottest year last year, the Amazon continues to be deforested. There are many other data points. Sergio talked about when he asked Ibrahim about natural disasters. So my point here is that COP30 offers an incredible opportunity for this reflection, right? And I agree with Mafalda that we need to adjust the narrative, but I also agree with many others, and I want to highlight a point that Rodrigo made, which is beyond adjust the narrative, we need to reshape how we operate. We need to rethink how we deliver. So narrative enough, it's not going to take us anywhere. Narrative is a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition. That's part of my summary here. And for that, I want to refer again to points that Simon made, and I'll finish up with something that Ibrahim said. When Simon spoke about bankable, implementable, adaptable, right? I read and think of COP30 and what can be different, and to the point that I just made, going beyond the narrative and redefining how we operate and deliver, I think the word that comes to my mind listening to these speakers is deployment, delivery, right? We all left Baku with this sense of frustration that, okay, it's 300 billion, it's not 1.3 billion. I work in a bank, and I have to be honest with you. If my team came to me and they're not able to execute 100 billion and asked me for 1.3 trillion, I would say, you guys are joking. So I think our goal for COP30 should not necessarily focus on, getting a higher amount, but being able to clearly define how we're going to deliver on what we've got. And if we can deliver on what we've got, I think it's going to be a much easier case to make to donors, policymakers, governments, that we can achieve 1.3 billion. And finally, to wrap up, I would refer to what Ibrahim said in terms of where he wants to see his fund in 5 years and retire. I think we are like pretty much with the same retirement time frame. And what I think we should really think about, again, on this road for COP, for each one of our institutions and for us collectively, is to think of what he said in terms, what are my true priorities, the sense of urgency. We don't have any more time to waste. The opportunity to revert this by delivering, right? And then setting ourselves to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gabriel. I would like to thank Madam Nena Lili Nwapufu from the African Development Bank, our friend Ibrahima Sheikh Diong from the Loss and Damage Fund, and wish him well in this big challenge he has ahead of him. I would like to thank the Green Climate Fund, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Milken Institute, the Brazilian Association of Development